Ms. Thomas, do you want to wait until to entertain questions after each area, or are you willing to? How do you want to do that?
No, ma'am. I think that if people have questions, they can just ask at any point in time. I always hate for somebody to have a question they may want to ask and then not have an opportunity because they forget it, or we, for some reason, end up being short on time. I never want them to have any questions in this kind of a format, if that's okay with you.
Okay, do we have a time in terms of the meeting ending?
We're flexible. Last week it went for about an hour and a half, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I've set this so that we should be able to get through in an hour or less. But if there are more questions, I'm happy to work with people as long as they want to have questions answered.
Okay, so can we say an hour?
Yes, ma'am, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. It is now 2 o'clock and I will call the government budget overview meeting to order. Today is March 25th, 2020. Ms. Only, are you on?
Ms. I'm on. It's going to be me today.
Oh, Ms. Tate. All right, Ms. Black. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So there will be no actions taken during this meeting. However, to make sure that we are conforming with the all of the requirements for FOIA, would you please call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Malinowski. Pugh. McBride.
Present.
Livingston. Teratio. Joe Walker. Barron. Overture Walker. Mackey.
Here.
English. Oh.
Present.
Sorry.
Mackey's here.
And
Livingston
Mackey,
present.
Yes.
And English is present.
Ratio.
Yes, ma'am. Teratio and Newton.
Here.
Did you get Livingston?
Yes, sir. I got Mr. Livingston and Mr. Ratio and Miss Mackey.
Did you get English?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have over 6 members present. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. We have 6.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I would need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and properly second. Are there any changes?
No, Madam Chair, no change.
Thank you. We would have a vote, please.
All right. Malinowski. Pugh. McBride.
Yes.
Livingston.
Yes.
Teratio.
Yes.
Joe Walker. Barron. Overture Walker. Mackey.
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The agenda has been adopted. Our next presentation will be done by Mrs. Thomas, and Mr. Brown, our administrator, is here. So I'm not sure who's going to start off, Mr. Brown or Mrs. Thomas. And I will turn the program over to you at this time, the meeting.
Over to Ms. Thomas. Thank you, Ms. McBride. Ms. Thomas, if you will proceed, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. McBride. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Livingston, thank you also for being here. And actually to all council members that are here this afternoon, we appreciate it. We were speaking earlier that we know that some of you might have been watching the press conference with the president, and so we do appreciate your trying to join us. Helping me today with the presentation will be James Hayes, the budget director. And please feel free to, let me see here. Well, excuse me. I'm sort of going to go through our format for today. Today, we're going to provide you with as much information as we can to make you feel as confident as possible, especially to some of our newer members as we work through the budget process this year. So this is just an information session. It is interactive, so I'll encourage anybody that as you have questions, if you want to ask them, just please let me know. I do have a limited side screen here, so I may not be able to see your hands go up, but if you'll just speak up, that will be fine as well. Then we'll try to make sure that we are able to answer your questions while they're pertinent and on your mind. And then we'll be flexible also. We're happy to go back and clarify any information as we move forward, that if a item that we're moving forward to triggers a question on another issue, we'll be happy to move in any direction that we need. We will try to wrap this up in an hour today so that we can be respectful of your time. So with that, I'll move on if you're okay with that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I think all of you by now have seen this slide, I know at least 3 times. This just reminds you of the budgeting best practices and the definition of not only a balanced budget, but also a financially sustainable budget to ensure the sustainability of our community and our organization moving forward. We also last time talked about achieving a structurally balanced budget. This is another repeat slide, but I don't think it's something that we can say enough. It sort of goes to the fact that we need to match recurring revenues with recurring expenditures and make sure we have the appropriate amount of reserves as we move to the future for our planning purposes. As the last statement there is extremely important, a government should adopt a formal policy calling for structurally balanced budget. The policy should call for the budget to be structurally balanced where recurring revenues equal or exceed recurring expenditures. So we've talked a lot about fund balance guidelines, and again, because we are talking about the general fund that does have a fund balance policy for Richland County, I thought it would also be a good idea to remind us what those are. Richland County's fund balance policy states that we allow a minimum of 20% and a maximum of 35% in uncommitted funds or unassigned funds. This policy indicates, based upon our 2020 expenditures, which were $167,735,760, that balance should be somewhere between $33.5 million and $58.7 million. Our current fund balance is $43.5 million, which is 25.9% of the annual expenditures and well within our guidelines. So what's in the general fund? That's a really great question for a lot of people. If you look to your right there, that's a very jumbled list, but you guys are going to see a list that looks very similar to this, only with numbers out beside it as we start working through the budget process. The general fund budget last year was $186,701,068. And that increases expenditures by $18,940,333 over prior year. We did commit $7,822,394 of fund balance to balance the budget last year. So a bit further for you to understand what's in the general fund. The general fund for a county is a little bit different than that of a municipality because in the general fund in a county, you're also funding elected officials, many of which are elected officials by state statute. The elected officials that we support in Richland County are the auditor's office, of course, the council office, the county council, the clerk of court, the coroner, the probate judge, the sheriff, the solicitor, and the treasurer. These all are independent groups that we support. However, their employees, while they work for Richland County, they are not under the purview of the administrator. It's up to council to determine how that relationship works and what restrictions are placed upon those. So another thing that's in our general fund are some appointed officials. Some are appointed by state by the county and some are appointed by the state. We have our Board of Elections and Voter Registration, the delegation, which in our case is also paired with Veterans Affairs, the magistrate's offices, the Master in Equity, and the Register of Deeds. The Register of Deeds in Richland County is an appointed official. It's appointed in, I think, 6 counties. Ours happens to be one of those. In other counties, it's actually an elected position. So we'll also talk a little bit about some of the statutory requirements in the general fund. In Richland County, we actually have the Court-Appointed Special Advocates Office, or CASA. This specifically works with children's protection rights in the court systems. There are very few employees in that office. However, there are about 1,000 volunteers that actually work as guardian ad litems. And from what I read on their website, they have about $1 million worth of volunteer labor every year to work with these children to support them in the legal system. Many counties actually have their court-appointed special advocates work through the state office. So that was a structure that's a little bit different here in Richland County. We also fund a small portion of the health department by statute, a small portion of social services, and medical indigent care. Then the things that are a little more common in the general fund are the business administrative offices, and there is a list of most of those offices here in the county. All of these offices actually fall under the purview of the administrator, so all of the employees are Richland County employees, and they all do report in some way, shape, or form to the county administrator. Another thing that's in the general fund is capital improvements as it relates to county-owned assets. That's something that's very important because those assets in many cases are items that actually bring about revenue to the county. And also assets are only assets if they're kept in appropriate condition. Additionally, we have statutory and contract allocations that we also fund through our general fund budget. If there are any questions, please, again, just stop me. So we went through this slide last week as well. In 2020, which is our last complete fiscal year, which ended June 30, 2020, our general fund had a total expenditures of $167,735,760, excuse me. Personnel made up slightly over 128 million of that, or 76.5%. Operating expenditures made up 23% of that, or $38.7 million. And the capital outlay was only $670,000. That is a little bit low, but keep in mind that last year we did forego quite a bit of capital spending simply because of the impacts of COVID. Number one is that for the first 6 months of calendar 2020, it was very difficult to get projects started or completed. And for a period of time, the operations, even of the county, were modified significantly. In this $167 million expenditure, there was $3.892 million in lump sum distributions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our budget director, James Hayes, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about what makes up some of these numbers. James?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Laura, if I could just go back just a quick moment to your other slide talking about the capital outlay, just an add-on, because the general fund does support the 2 outside funds in the computer technology replacement fund and the vehicle replacement funds. Those numbers are not identified in that capital outlay. So there are some additional capital expenditures the general fund does support, and that we have a computer technology replacement fund and we have a vehicle replacement fund. So I just wanted to point that out for information. So thank you. So our as ACA Thomas mentioned, The general fund does support some auxiliary organizations. In a normal year, we have three different types of items that are funded out of the general fund in terms of outside agencies. They're the contractual and statutory, which we have three groups. There's the City Center Partnership, there's RADAC, and then there's the Midlands COG, Central Midlands COG, excuse me. And those totals for FY20 was just over $1 million, $1,939,000. Discretionary, I'm skipping over COVID for a reason at the moment, because I'm just talking about the normal ones that normally had come out in a normal year. We have the discretionary grant program, which is funded at $200,000 each year, but last year the actual amount was $149,302. And then we have what we call lump sum appropriations, which of course are various groups that are funded by council motion that are also funded. Last year that tune was 2.1 million. So, but last year was an atypical year because we had another category of outside groups that we funded, and that was through our COVID grant program. 250,000 was of that 612,000 was for senior resources, and the other 382,000 was for as a part of our COVID-19 grant program. That grant program sort of carried over into FY21, and we expended more of that. But as of FY20, like at the end of FY20, I think we had 382,000, and then the other 250 was for senior resources. I'll stop right there before we go to the next slide if anybody got any questions. Okay. So the next one is Lori mentioned, actual general fund expenditures last year was 167.7 million. For of that 167.7 million, 128.3 was for personnel. So that's roughly almost 77% of budgeted expenditures were for personnel. Medicare and Social Security, of course, it's FICA. That 7.65% is the percentage that's used to calculate it. Retirement depends on if it's SCRS, or which is regular retirement, or if it's PORS, police retirement. Those percentages are either 15.56% or 18.24%. And in terms of health and dental vision insurance, it roughly amounts to 13.25% of personnel expenditures.
Mr. Hayes.
Okay. I go to the next slide.
Mr. Hayes,
Mr. Hayes.
Shakir, I mean, Ms. Newton, sorry.
Thank you. Two quick questions, Mr. Hayes.
Yes.
On the personnel costs that you're reflecting, are those, I'm presuming that those are personnel costs across the entire county, including some of the personnel that doesn't fall under the purview of the administrator. So say, for example, the sheriff's department, et cetera. Is that correct?
That is all general fund expenditures, 128.3 million. And you're right, those would include some elected officials as well, sheriff, solicitor, coroner, so on and so forth. As long as they're in the general fund, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And then my last question is, generally speaking, is that about the average percentage of our budget that it takes up each year? Because at any given point in time, organizations have vacancies that they're trying to fill. They also have new positions that they're adding, but does it more or less fall in this area?
I would have to give you a definite look back and look at some of the average, but I would say, yeah, the vast majority of it should be in the 70-something% range, but you're correct, depending on if new positions are added or additional funding like total rewards and things of that nature, or COLA, but generally it's probably 70-something%, but I'll be more than happy to take a look at and see what we've averaged the last few years, ma'am.
That's sufficient for me. Thank you, Mr. Hayes.
Okay. All right. So, so the next slide talks about public safety. So, of the 167.7 million in FY20 expenditures, our biggest category, of course, was public safety, which was 84.2 million. So we listed the various departments that fall under the public safety. Of course, the sheriff department, which is the overwhelming majority of that amount, 38.5 million. Right along with special duty, and those two combined are almost 1/4 of the general fund expenditures. You see some other ones like the detention center, the coroner's office, EMS, planning, But again, the key thing here is that public safety is our largest, as you can see, it's about 50.2% of general fund expenditures. And you have the different, we broke down what percentage of well, each department that falls under public safety, what their percentage of public safety, which in the case of the sheriff is 45.7, then what percentage they are of the general fund in total. So so the sheriff will be almost, again, 25% when you add the sheriff and special duty together. And then you see the other various public safety departments out as outlined.
Mr. Hayes,
Yes,
what is the special duty?
Well, that again, I certainly don't want to speak for the sheriff office. I'm not sure if anybody's online, but I'll simply say that's when the sheriff, they do outside work for certain entities, and there's a fee for service. But again, like I said, I certainly don't want to speak for the sheriff's office, but that's
Okay.
my understanding, sir.
That comes under the sheriff's office.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
James?
Ms. McBride, I have a question. I can't raise my hand for some reason on my
Okay.
computer.
Go ahead.
There's regarding the sheriff budget, does that does not include the capital outlay for vehicles and so forth, does it?
No, sir, it does not. Very good question. No, that does not include that, because we don't pay for that directly out of the general fund. Historically, that's been paid for out of bond costs, but that's a great question, sir. But no, it does not include that.
Yeah, I just want council to be aware that there may be some things that a department may receive that's not included here. Thank you.
James, if I
Yes,
may?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
It's also good to point out here that there's an additional $8.6 million that's expended through the general fund for health insurance, health, dental, and vision insurance for these employees that's also not included in these costs.
Yes, ma'am. Very good. Okay. I guess we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this slide here is pretty interesting. As I mentioned, the general fund doesn't just take care of itself. There are quite a few other funds that the general fund does support. We mentioned that the expenditures for the general fund was $167 million last year, but that does not include the $8 or $9 million annually that the general fund supports other funds. We listed some of the bigger ones here. School resource officers was budgeted transfer. This for FY20 was 1.5 million. The actual transfer was 1.3. The third column represents what percentage of the general fund does it support. It's supported by the actual. So 23% of the actual transfer, 23% of the general fund, the general fund supported 23% of that fund's budget is what we're saying. So for public defender last year, it was 3.4 million budgeted, but the actual amount moved over was 3.5. Then of course, victim assistance and then emergency telephone. The last slide that I'll go over, we're talking about some of the revenue sources for the general fund.
Mr. Hayes,
Yes.
with the general fund transfers, so that's just the, for the school resource officers, the 1.3 million, that's just for money transferred for FY20. Is that's different
Yes,
from
ma'am.
having the
That's
total
great.
funds?
Right, yes, ma'am. Those funds came from the general fund to support school resource. That number will be much higher in FY21 as council recently approved the budget amendment. But we're showing what the actual number was for FY20. But yes, ma'am, you're correct.
Thank you.
So again, the general fund has various financing sources. Property taxes, the overwhelming majority. I think when I did the math for the budget for FY21, it was roughly 60% of the general fund dollars come from property taxes. There are other ones like fee and lieu, which again, like I said, it is, as I mentioned last week, it is also property tax related. It's just that it's not ad valorem. It's not based off the your millage changing every year. It's a locked in millage rate, but it's still property taxes. There's the local government fund. There's licenses and permits. There's charges for service. Charges for service is actually our second largest revenue source in the general fund based off FY21 budget. I think that's like roughly 12%. Then we also get some fund from fees and fines and also interest income. So these are, like I said, the various revenue categories for the general fund.
Mr. Hayes,
Yes, ma'am.
with the feedlot, that's really property taxes.
Yes, ma'am. It is property taxes. The only difference between that and regular property taxes, the millage rate may change from year to year, but with a fee in lieu, because the company has worked out an agreement with the county, you all have locked in that millage rate for a certain number of years due to a certain amount of investment that was achieved.
Yeah, and it could be less than what they would have normally received.
Typically,
For
they are.
property
Yes,
tax.
typically,
Yes.
typically.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I think Lori's gonna pick back up now.
James, if you could, for a moment, I know you and I had talked a little bit about earlier this week that we are starting to see some economic impacts on some of our revenue sources. I
Yes.
believe you said that interest income this year is going to be
Yeah,
reduced.
yeah, and I'll speak briefly about that. Certainly, Director Ham can speak more to it. But yeah, so we know before COVID, interest revenue has started to drive up pretty good, and so we budgeted according to actual. But of course, the market started to tank with COVID, so we're starting to notice that the amount of money that was budgeted for interest income, which did match what we have gotten in the past pre-COVID, but the actual amount that's coming in now, we're noticing is going to drop considerably. So, so that is a concern.
Thank you, James. Also, last week, for those of you who are here, you may remember Mr. Malinowski asking about the local government fund and if there was any indication that the state had considered fully funding that. For the last, I guess, 12 years, the state has only funded the local government fund about 2/3. Last week, on the day after our training session, I was on a meeting with the South Carolina Association of Counties, and there is a bill in the House budget that would fully fund the local government fund, which could be a very good thing for Richland County this year. So I would encourage each of you council members to reach out to your representatives and ask them to please support that. And if it would be beneficial to you, I'll be happy to get the bill number so that you could actually reference and as you reach out to ask for that, because that would be a tremendous help this year. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Terratio.
I was just going to say, yes, please. Will you do that?
I will. I most certainly will. And hopefully there will be other funding that we will see that may be allocated to some of the counties, given the amount of revenue that's going to be coming into the counties based upon the most recent stimulus package. While we're still waiting to see what that's going to look like and what the restrictions are going to be on it, we do anticipate that there could be some additional funding, and that might encourage the state to fully fund the local government fund going forward as well.
This is just a
Remind
general, Miss Thomas.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a general question.
Sure.
Should we get the funding from the federal government, should it come down, would that make it possible that we would later go in, because we may have to have a very conservative budget this time, would that make it possible for us to go back and amend it later should those resources come down? Or
it's possible. However, what I am hearing, or what everyone is hearing from Treasury right now, is that the restrictions on those funds are going to fall into 4 categories. They're very defined. One of the things that it indicates is that you cannot allocate these funds to be used to recover lost tax dollars. So that's one restriction that we would come up against. But yes, there's always that possibility. And of course, if we do get funding, we can look at, we already have, people looking at what can we do with the funds, what are they able to be allocated for? And like I said, we're still waiting on Treasury. This all happened so very quickly that the regulations really weren't in place. Mr. Brown, do you have anything to add to that?
No, you get the nail on the head. That is correct. And Ms. McBride, members of council, what you can expect is through the committee ran by Ms. Barron, that these are some of the items that we will be discussing. So you can look to have that information come in the upcoming weeks as we get more information from the Treasury.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. We'll remind you too that one restriction and one reason we're really happy that it may be possible for the local government fund to be funded this year is that Act 388, while it is very popular with homeowners, it does restrict the county's ability or any local government's ability to increase millage. We also have very strict regulations on adjusting our millage rates based on the loss credit every year and applying an appropriate credit there. So while we always have the power of the millage is limited by state statute now. So I'll just remind you of that. And again, I'll be sharing the information on the House bill to fully fund the local government fund because I do believe that is something that would certainly help us to address Act 388. And it would be really great if there was some consideration for some adjustment to Act 388 because it's now been in existence for over 20 years. And while it did a great thing for people during a time where property taxes were appreciating at a great rate, it's not been adjusted since that time. Again, your millage schedule, in case any of you would ever need that to speak to a constituent, to understand that county millage is really only a small part of their tax bills. The larger portion of their tax bills actually typically are their school district taxes. And of course, if they live within an incorporated area, they're municipal taxes as well. So some areas of consideration that you'll see that we'll be trying to work to address this year in the budget if we have the capacity is one is deferred maintenance. As I said, last year, we did not invest heavily at all in capital because of COVID, but there are budget constraints there as well that impact maintenance. So we do have some assets that may not have completely or been cared for as completely as they should have. So we're trying to address some of those areas, and that will be an ongoing process. Deferred maintenance is not something you can fix in 1 year. So we'll be trying to come up with a plan to actually address maintenance on all of our assets over a long period of time in a capital plan and also in a strategic budgeting plan. Capital needs and updates. Again, capital is the word of the day. There are some things that we really need to focus on. As Mr. Brown had said in his address to you all back in January, we really need to look at updating our processes and our means of doing so to communicate effectively with citizens, to actually work most effectively, and to be as competitive as we possibly can. And one of those areas is IT, where some investment is needed. So we'll be looking at those kinds of things. Vehicle updates and replacements. We have a lot of vehicles, close to 1,000 vehicles in our fleet. And we have been looking at alternative mechanisms to be able to either update those or to replace those on a cyclical program. We're trying to find out if that's actually a feasible program to roll into this budget year or how that might affect our budget going forward. We don't want to look at a single year budget. So as we evaluate these programs, we're actually looking at them on a 7 to 10 year schedule to make certain that it's sustainable for a longer period of time.
Mrs.
And
Thomas,
then, yes, ma'am.
With the vehicle updates, does that include the sheriff's office?
Yes, ma'am, it does. Their fleet represents about 60% of the county fleet. So that is a significant, it's the majority, first and foremost, and it's a significant expenditure. And we would have to address that as well.
And do they not have sort of policies in terms of replacement?
There are, however, vehicle replacement is an expensive proposition. Every year we've been allocating $500,000 in vehicle replacements outside of the sheriff's fund, and we've been bonding to purchase some vehicles for the Sheriff's Department. Last year, if I understand, I think we borrowed $2.5 million in a 20-year bond to purchase vehicles for the Sheriff's Department. We were hoping to get 50 vehicles out of that, but because of the cost of the vehicles, we were not able to achieve 50 vehicles. So, and 50 vehicles, when you look at 600 vehicles, is not a great portion. When you actually think that that the typical vehicle in a patrol fleet has a lifespan of 5 years, that's not turning your fleet every 5 years, even in any fleet we have, actually.
Okay, and one other question regarding the deferred maintenance. Maybe you or Mr. Brown can help with this one. Where does blight is a really big issue in Richland County now? That does not come under the maintenance. That is in a total separate category. And where would that fall?
Well, I can answer the first part of that, and I'll let Mr. Brown probably answer the second half of it. No, ma'am, blight would not fall under this. Our deferred maintenance that I'm speaking of is strictly in county properties,
Right.
and county systems. I would imagine that addressing urban blight would fall under some of your community projects. Mr. Brown?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. I was going to say they would come from program dollars, Ms. McBride, unless we decided, in addition to program dollars, that we were able to allocate specific funding from somewhere else.
Okay. Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure that others understood that. But with the for the trash and garbage collection, that's still a separate area, and that would fall under revenues. Where would that fall?
That's an enterprise fund, and we'll talk about those tomorrow.
Okay, so
yes, ma'am.
Those are some major areas that I know some council persons are dealing with now, and as a whole, the county is dealing with. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yep. Thank you very much for the question. And then, of course, yes, I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to chime in real quick. And I just wanted to remind the council that the council did set aside some money for blight through the H-Tax program in the past, so I can just recall that. So when she said blight, that jarred my memory. So I just wanted to remind the council of that.
That's good. Thank you.
Lori, one more thing before we move on, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
In reference to vehicle updates and replacement, members of council, I know probably a couple of years ago, you all had asked for staff to look into leasing versus purchasing. So we're not going to go into detail on this call, but you can expect for us to be presenting some information to you concerning that, which will give you some opportunities to look at how we're going to roll out a potential program like leasing. So just want to give you that heads up. That'll be a different conversation, but it is relevant to our discussion. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And one last thing on vehicles that I will add in is that we really also have to address some of our emergency vehicles for EMS and for the fire areas. Those are very expensive propositions. So we're also looking into additional grant funding because we have had some grants for that. But no matter what, we will have to also look at some expenditures and mechanisms to be able to afford to work to address that fleet as well. The last item on the list here is insurance, and the market this year is really tough all around. I hate to see that, but we do expect double-digit increases in all lines of insurance. And when I say all lines, I'm saying right now my best estimate for health insurance is a minimum 10%. But when you look at the cost that the county incurs there, the total cost of that program is about $24 million. That includes the employees portion. The county pays close to 20 million of that. So there's only about 20% picked up by the employee. When you look at a $24 million program, 10% is $2.4 million. So we're coming up with some alternatives for that for council consideration as well. as to funding mechanisms and actual allocations and things of that nature. So look for that to be a significant conversation for us to have. On the general liability and property insurance, it's been indicated to us that we will also be looking at significant increases there. One of the larger ones will be on our airport liability insurance. Those are 3-year policies. We're finishing up our 3rd year, so we will see a significant increase in that because it has been 3 years since it has been rated. So you're going to see some changes across the board in those programs as well. Any questions along those lines? Well, with that, that's all we have to present to you today, but we're happy to open the door to any questions that you might have thought of along the way that you didn't have an opportunity to ask.
Ms. McBride, I have a question.
Yes, sir, Mr.
Hello?
Livingston? Mr.
Yes.
Livingston?
That amount for salaries, does that include any increase in salary for staff and staff, or is it just based on current salaries?
All right, you want me to answer that, Laura?
Please.
So Mr. Livingston, yes, that when council implemented the total reward study, what was that, August of 2019. So yeah, that was FY20. So that would have, and then that would have incorporated funds that were also expended for the total reward. So yes, sir.
Okay, so we're still phasing that in this budget.
Well, wait, yeah, well, yeah,
We talked about phasing in. I think that's what we're doing.
Yeah, we're somewhere with it.
But there are funds in the current amount that you showed us for that.
I'm sorry, say it again, sir.
But the fund, the amount that you showed for salaries included that. Right.
So whatever increases that were due to total rewards for FY
included
in that 128.2 million.
That's my question. Thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Newton?
I'm sorry. I'll step back, Lord. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Ms. Newton?
No, I would love it if Mr. Brown wanted to address Mr. Livingston's question before I ask mine.
Okay, thank you, Ms. I want to say I think we need to really clean this up a little bit, Mr. Hayes, because we had this conversation last year during the budget cycle. I think the short answer is yes, it's included, but not the full amount of TRS, and it was only an initial portion that's quote unquote included, but not phase 2 or phase 3. There has not been additional funding phased into this current amount that you have seen over and above an initial amount. So I just want to make sure that we're clear when we're addressing this, Mr. Hayes. So can you please articulate specifically, what TRS was supposed to be? If it was a 1, 2, 3 phase, and if it is, that what we've only shown is what will be considered phase 1, but no other phases are currently included in the amount that was shown.
And that is correct. So the count. So for phase 1, which was August of 2019, bringing employees up to the minimum, that cost was around about 1.7, 1.8 million. So then in January of 20, council approved phase 2, which was budgeted at 1.5 million, annualized for FY21 at 3 million. So the total amount that we have budgeted was 4.8 million. But again, that was for FY20, FY21, but currently there are no additional funds for any phases outside of what we left off in January 2020.
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Ms. Newton?
Thank you. Well, first, and Ms. Thomas, you and I spoke about this. I would love, in addition to those numbers, for us to have some sort of report on total rewards and where we are and how we want to move forward with that, because I can't remember exactly how Mr. Hayes worded it. We're somewhere with it. That is how I would have to answer that question if somebody asked me, and I'd like to have a greater level of specificity around that. But my other questions were a few questions. One is, and if you said it, I apologize. Just first of all, from a starting point, as we plan next year's budget, are we starting with the supposition that there will be less money available for the general fund than in prior years?
I would say that we will probably, I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen that number yet. James? I would say we would probably be about even with this year, this fiscal year.
So if I had to answer that question today, just looking at what, again, this is still early. Obviously, revenue numbers for 21 are not final, but with the possible loss in revenue for some category, I wouldn't feel comfortable going above what was currently budgeted for FY21. Again, it's still early. It's a lot of factors going in play still, but I wouldn't be comfortable beyond that. At this, that's the best answer I can say at this point in time.
Thank you, and I'm certainly comfortable with a conservative budget with the level of uncertainty that we have. So that's kind of the general fund starting point. So next question, Ms. Thomas mentioned something, and if I wrote it down correctly, when we were talking about personnel costs, what I wrote down was that the approximately 76% of the general fund that was going towards personnel, that number did not include an additional $8.6 million in insurance costs. So my first question is, did I write that down correctly? And if so, could you say a little bit more about what that means?
No, ma'am, I was addressing public safety, I believe. I think we might have gotten, that might have been where I got my wires crossed, and I apologize on that. No, in the 127 million of personnel cost is included all of public safety's personnel cost as well. However, when you break public safety out and I look at their full expenditures, the $84.2 million of their full expenditures does not include $8.6 million in health insurance that is in the general fund, but not allocated in our bookkeeping methodology to their departments.
Perfect. Great answer.
Okay, gotcha. And then last question, and I'm happy to have somebody send an answer offline, but I believe that Mr. Hayes said something about funds for blight remediation being allocated as part of the H-tax, and I would love to understand more about what that means.
Yeah, if you want me to, I can answer it briefly right quick. Yeah, that was something that's been carried on the books the last few years. It was the going back to the prior administrator. It was the Gateway Pocket Park urban blight removal. So that's something that's been carried over year to year. I don't think you all have ever expended any money, but it's been funds that's been budgeted. And again, this is going back to the first biennium FY 18-19 that's just been carried over in H-tax each year.
Mr. Hayes.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm sorry I left you all for a minute or two, but had some technical problems. Was that part of the one of the phases of the Renaissance?
I don't want to quote.
Okay.
You had some kind of Renaissance, but I'm
Yeah,
not
I
sure.
think that was one of the phases in the Renaissance.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I do have a personnel question, and Mr. Brown may have to answer this one. In terms of emergency management, there was an issue about not having enough employees and needing more people. Will that have an impact on the personnel budget?
Yes, ma'am. One of the things that I will be doing as a part of my recommended budget, Ms. McBride, is addressing that area. There is two components to that. One component is, as you heard, that there is a staffing concern in that area. My understanding from the department is that concern goes back a couple of years, and that previously the county had made some, I guess, had some discussions. I don't know if there was actual council approval or not, but that there would be additional resources given to that department through personnel. But as I understand it, for whatever number of reasons, it didn't happen. So that's one issue. Another issue is that routinely that department, because of some of that staffing, has overtime, and that overtime is not routinely budgeted. So you have, quote unquote, a gap there that we need to fill, and that we've been working towards since I've been here, and that's happened to a certain degree. And then the other one is we do need to address, in addition to the personnel, there are capital costs. So EMS is certainly an area that has 3 prongs that I'm hoping that the county council will take a look at as a part of my recommended budget and see what we can do to financially support that initiative.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to make the council members aware of it as we talked about personnel issues and for things that you all may bring before us for consideration.
Thank you, Ms. McBride.
Ms. Thomas,
Yes.
you have other issues you want to deal with, or?
Actually, I think that's the end of our presentation. If no one else has any questions, that's the end of it.
Okay, let me make sure that none of our council persons have questions. First, I want to thank Ms. Thomas, you and Mr. Hayes and Mr. Brown for an excellent presentation. And I think that this is something that's very good to help not only new council members, but even some of us veterans. And I'm just a 4-year veteran, so I'm not that far out, for bringing us this update. I think that it's something needed for all council members, and it will make our overall budget process much smoother. So again, let me thank you for that.
I do have one question. I apologize.
Yes, sir, Mr. Livingston.
Do you all have an idea of when you get the next set of projections in terms of revenue that may be coming in, whether it's property taxes or any other revenue sources? When we may have another projection of what those revenues might be?
We're working
Thanks.
on, this is Stacy Ham, Finance Director. We're working on getting most of the information through February actually booked in the system. And once we have that, we'll be able to do a little bit better projections. So we got some of the March in, but that's not complete, and the taxes aren't in yet for March. But usually after March, we have like 9 months in, and we usually have a pretty good idea where we are on the revenue. I know, like Mr. Hayes said, the interest is way low. A lot of our charges are low with the court systems not holding and bringing in a lot of fines and fees that we have. So we'll be able to do a better look at where we stand.
All right, thank you.
Okay. And Ms. Ham, I want to thank you. I didn't know you were on, so I want to thank you for all the work that you do. And I know a lot is going on right now during this budget process. So we appreciate your work also.
Thank you, ma'am.
With that said, if there are no more questions, then I need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
This meeting is officially over. Thank you.
Thank you.